In early September, news broke that determined the further course of events. Russian troops launched massive strikes on railway junctions deep inside Ukrainian territory. The main target was the Sinelnikovo station in the Dnipropetrovsk region, through which units and equipment were being transferred to the Donbas region. The strikes disabled a key artery and effectively paralyzed the movement of reserves. From that moment on, the front line for Ukrainian units was broken, and transfers became slow and uneven. Such events change the picture of hostilities, which is why it is important to analyze them in detail. To stay up to date with future releases, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Throughout history, transport hubs have always played a key role in conflicts. Whoever controls the roads and railway stations is able to control the movement of entire armies. In early August, the Russian side bet on systematic strikes against the railway infrastructure. According to reports from the Russian Ministry of Defense, the target was not only the facility itself, but also the enemy's ability to quickly transfer forces from one section of the front to another. According to military correspondents, after the defeat of the Sinelnikovo station, the Ukrainian command faced a new reality. Units could only move in small groups, which sharply reduced the pace of maneuver. In a positional confrontation, this means a loss of flexibility and an opportunity for the other side to develop an offensive. At the same time, attention was drawn to statements that new Ukrainian units had been transferred to Sumy. In particular, this concerned the 421st Sapson Unmanned Aerial Vehicle Battalion. It arrived in the Sumy direction from the Donetsk sector. The transfer highlights how serious the pressure on the northeastern regions has become. But due to disrupted logistics, even such maneuvers seem belated. The situation in the Kharkiv region has also escalated. It was reported that units of the 143rd Mechanized Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine were surrounded in a forest near Ambarn. Reinforcements from the Territorial Defense Forces did not save the situation. In these conditions, sources said that Russian forces continued to tighten the ring. It is important for the viewer to understand that these are not random skirmishes, but systematic work that became possible after the isolation of the front. At the same time, diplomatic processes were unfolding. In August, Western politicians, including former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Prince Harry, visited Kyiv. Their visits were largely symbolic, but they reflected a desire to keep attention focused on Ukraine. However, even they acknowledged that Western interest in the conflict was waning. Johnson openly said that his country no longer played a leading role as it had before. These words are particularly significant against the backdrop of ongoing discussions within the European Union. Estonian Foreign Minister Kaja Kallas announced the extension of sanctions against Russia for another 6 months. But journalist Che Boaz described the sanctions policy as stifling Europe's own economy. His ironic remark on social media sparked widespread debate. Thus, military pressure is compounded by a crisis in European unity. Meanwhile, an incident occurred in the Zaporizhia region that caused a wide resonance. Several officers of the main intelligence directorate of Ukraine were captured after an operation by Russian units. The commander of the special unit, codenamed Viking, said that they were lured into position and taken alive. Such cases show that intelligence structures also suffer losses and are not always able to control the situation. An important detail is that the Ukrainian armed forces themselves have introduced a bonus system for defeating Russian tank crews. According to a tank commander with the call sign Deputy, the enemy is hunting not so much for equipment as for the people inside. To do this, they use drones that circle above the vehicle and wait for the crew to exit. This practice highlights the ferocity of the fighting and adds an element of psychological pressure. All these events come together to form a single picture. Strikes on transport hubs were the first step in the operation to isolate the front. Enemy transfers have slowed down, the encirclement in the Kharkiv region has intensified, and new units are being rushed to other areas. Diplomatic gestures from the West are not changing the situation on the ground. And internal discussions in Europe only reinforce the sense of uncertainty. After the first strikes on infrastructure, it became clear that the situation was reaching a new level. The destruction of key hubs not only made it difficult to transfer troops, but also created an effect that military observers called severed arteries. The longer this dynamic continues, the stronger the result becomes. Active maneuvers began in northeastern Ukraine. Russian sources reported advances in the Kharkiv region, where Ukrainian units were trying to organize their defense. However, the inability to rotate troops quickly led to units becoming isolated. It was reported that a group from the 143rd Mechanized Brigade was surrounded. The forest became traps where maneuverability was limited. The situation was similar in the Sumy direction. The Ukrainian command transferred the 22nd Separate Battalion from the Presidential Brigade, which had previously participated in the attack on the Kursk region, to this area. Its task was to reinforce the 225th Assault Regiment, which had lost a significant part of its personnel after an unsuccessful counterattack near Andrivka. But here too, logistics became the main obstacle. The more units were concentrated in the area, the more noticeable it became that supplies were lagging behind demand. In addition, there were reports of the presence of foreign mercenaries. According to military sources, groups were being transferred to the Sumy and Kharkiv directions, including from Poland. At the same time, reports from the combat zone emphasized that foreigners who had been captured quickly passed on all the information they knew. A Russian officer with the call sign Zak claimed that fear was stronger than discipline and that prisoners had revealed the numbers and positions of Ukrainian units. Western countries continued to officially declare their support. In August, a number of European Union and NATO countries spoke of their readiness to send military contingents to Ukraine. However, American political commentator Steve Gill called these statements false. He noted that key countries had already rejected such ideas and that it all boiled down to political bluffing. In his opinion, this approach only exacerbates divisions within the alliance. Against this backdrop, attention was drawn to the fact that the Russian Ministry of Defense reported that it had prevented an attack on a train carrying ammunition. Ukrainian artillery carried out a massive bombardment of the area around the station where the train was located. However, the military commander of the station, Major Mikhail Demidov, managed to quickly move the train to a spare track. Thanks to this, the cargo was saved and sent to its destination. This episode showed how important individual decisions made on the ground can be. Meanwhile, tensions surrounding Poland were mounting on the international agenda. Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski stated that drones had invaded the country's airspace, coming not only from Belarus, but also from Ukraine. According to him, the air confrontation lasted 7 hours. However, after these words, the Polish minister tried to blame Russia for everything, calling the incident an operation by Moscow. The Russian Ministry of Defense denied these accusations and emphasized that no targets on Polish territory had been planned. At the same time, Sikorski clarified that Warsaw does not intend to sever their diplomatic relations with Moscow. He noted the importance of maintaining channels of communication even with adversaries. This position demonstrates the duality of Polish policy. On the one hand, there are loud accusations. On the other hand, there is caution, which prevents decisive action. Even more alarming was the information from Georgia. The country's state security service reported that Ukrainian special services had attempted to transport a truck with hexogen through its territory. 2 kilograms and 400 grams of explosives were found in the truck with Ukrainian license plates. According to the investigation, the driver confessed that the cargo was intended for Russia and was to be used in an operation codenamed Web 2. However, the case file also contained a Tbilisi address. This episode caused a great stir and was linked to the upcoming municipal elections in Georgia. Thus, a number of international and diplomatic episodes are added to the military events on the front line. Each of them emphasizes that the conflict has long gone beyond the limits of a local confrontation. It affects Europe, Georgia, Poland, and other countries, involving them in a chain of crises. All these facts together create an alarming backdrop. Troop transfers are slowing down, encirclements are becoming a reality, international alliances are showing weakness, and Europe is growing tired of sanctions. The situation is escalating on several levels at once. Every day, events on the front lines and in the political corridors come together to form a single picture. Strikes on infrastructure have left the Ukrainian command facing a dilemma. On the one hand, it is necessary to hold the front line in Donbas. On the other hand, a critical situation is developing in the Sumy and Kharkiv regions. The transfer of units requires time, which is not available. Experts note that the logistical crisis could escalate in the coming weeks. The railway network in the east of the country is important not only for the military but also for the civilian population. The destruction of key stations is slowing down the delivery of fuel, food, and medicine. All this is increasing tensions within Ukrainian society. The political context is no less important. Western allies are increasingly showing signs of disagreement. Some countries talk about their readiness to expand arms supplies, while others openly question the wisdom of such steps. Symbolic visits by Boris Johnson or Prince Harry to Kyiv cannot change the balance of power. They are more gestures of support than real help. Irritation is growing within the European Union. The extension of sanctions for 6 months is perceived not as a means of putting pressure on Russia, but as a blow to its own economy. Chaboaz's words that Europe has strangled itself resonate with part of the public. This prompts discussions about how justified the strategy of confrontation is. Meanwhile, the United States is also facing limitations. Commentator Steve Gill emphasizes that statements about the possibility of sending troops to Ukraine have no real basis. None of the major allies are prepared to take such a risky step. This means that if the situation continues to deteriorate, Ukrainian forces cannot count on direct military intervention from the West. Another worrying development has been the increase in sabotage operations. The case of the truck in Georgia shows that Ukrainian special services are looking for opportunities to expand their activities far beyond their own borders. According to the investigation, this was an attempt to carry out a terrorist attack codenamed Web 2. Even if the version about the ultimate goal in Tbilisi is confirmed, the very fact that explosives were transported through several countries indicates the risk of escalation. From an analytical point of view, there are several possible scenarios. The first scenario is that Russian forces will continue to advance in the Kharkiv region, taking advantage of the enemy's weakened logistics. In this case, the encirclement will expand, and the transfer of new battalions from other directions will be too slow. The second scenario involves Ukraine concentrating its efforts on holding the Sumy direction. The transfer of the Sapsan battalion and the Presidential Brigade indicates that Kyiv is preparing for possible Russian actions in this area. However, without reliable supplies, such steps may only be a temporary measure. The third scenario involves diplomatic pressure. Ukraine and its allies will try to draw the attention of the international community to incidents in Poland and Georgia. This could form the basis for new accusations against Russia and an intensified information campaign. However, given the internal crisis in the European Union, the effectiveness of such steps is questionable. Poland plays a special role in this regard. Foreign Minister Sikorski's remarks about drones flying in from Ukraine are an alarming signal. If such statements are repeated, Warsaw may find itself in a difficult position. On the one hand, Poland remains one of Kyiv's main allies. On the other hand, acknowledging the threat from Ukraine undermines public confidence in the government. This creates fertile ground for political crises within Poland itself. All of these factors create an alarming backdrop. Strikes on railway junctions have a long-term effect. The transfer of reserves is becoming a problem that affects the Ukrainian armed forces' ability to hold the front line. International allies are showing signs of fatigue and disagreement. Sabotage operations are drawing new countries into the conflict. Analysts emphasize that the situation could escalate in the next 2 months. If Russia continues to isolate the front, it will become increasingly difficult for Ukrainian troops to hold their defenses. And internal crises in Europe could reduce the level of support for Kyiv. The result is an alarming prospect in which military, diplomatic, and economic factors are intertwined in a single knot, and this knot is tightening with each passing day. The events of recent weeks show that the operation to strike transport infrastructure has been a turning point. The big news about the destruction of the railway junction in the Dnipropetrovsk region turned out to be not just an episode, but the starting point for a whole chain of consequences. The transfer of reserves slowed down, the front became isolated, and Ukrainian units increasingly found themselves surrounded or in conditions where supplies could not keep up with demand. The history of military conflicts knows many examples when control over logistics determined the outcome of battles. The Roman legions won thanks to the roads that connected the entire empire. In the 20th century, armies used railways for lightning-fast troop movements. Today, we are seeing a repeat of this law of war. Transport arteries are the lifeblood of the front line. When the arteries are cut, forces begin to lose their ability to resist. The political situation only adds to the drama. Visits by Western politicians to Kyiv are more of a gesture than real help. Boris Johnson admits that his country's interest in Ukraine is waning. Prince Harry shows interest but does not bring any concrete solutions. Against this backdrop, the words of European journalists that sanctions are suffocating Europe itself sound particularly alarming. Allies are increasingly arguing with each other, and statements about the possibility of sending contingents remain nothing more than empty words. We must not forget about new hotspots of tension. Poland reports drones flying in from different directions, including from Ukraine. Georgia detains Ukrainian citizens with explosives. These episodes show that the geography of the conflict is expanding, involving countries that previously remained mere observers. Each such case adds to the risk of uncontrolled escalation. Analysts highlight several possible scenarios. The first is continued pressure on the Kharkiv and Sumy regions with a gradual tightening of the encirclement. The second is an attempt by Kyiv to hold the front at the cost of deploying its last reserves. The third is a diplomatic campaign with an emphasis on international incidents. But whatever scenario plays out, they all point to further escalation and increased instability in the region. It is important for the viewer to understand that what is happening is not limited to the front line. This is a story about how strikes on railways have changed the strategic picture. This is a story about how allies are beginning to have doubts, and contradictions within Europe are becoming increasingly apparent. This is a story about how new countries are being drawn into a chain of crises. In the coming months, the world may witness new stages of this confrontation. Perhaps there will be new encirclements, perhaps diplomatic scandals, perhaps new incidents outside Ukraine. All these elements add up to an alarming forecast, where every decision and every delay can have serious consequences. Today we stand on the threshold of developments that could change not only the balance of power on the battlefield, but also the political map of Europe. And the further we go, the more obvious it becomes that there are no easy solutions to this conflict. To sum up, we can say that the strikes on infrastructure have led to logistical paralysis, diplomatic disagreements have exacerbated the crisis, and international episodes have broadened the scope of the conflict. All of this together paints a picture of growing tension and increasingly alarming forecasts. To follow the development of this story, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stay with us. We will analyze every detail so that you can see the big picture and understand what is behind the dry news reports.